All right, I just ran the Houston Marathon on Sunday. This video I am going to go over everything from when I left on Friday through the race recap and then to when I got back home on Sunday. So if you want just the race details, you'll have to fast forward. It'll be somewhere in the middle of the video. Okay, so to start with, on Friday I went to work. I still have a day job, so I did my morning meetings. And then I headed out and my wife drove me to the airport just after noon. My flight was around 1 o'clock from Minneapolis to Houston. My shoe of choice was the Nike Killshot 2. I had a snack on the plane. Everything was going well. Landed in Houston right on time. Unfortunately, right when I landed and went to check my messages, I had a text from United that my flight home, which was scheduled for Monday morning, had been canceled. So that's unfortunate. I looked into some other flights on Monday. All the Delta flights were pretty expensive. United only had one other flight with no economy seats left, so that one was even more expensive. Ended up going with a different United flight that was scheduled to go back on Sunday night. So it was scheduled to depart at 8:05 on Sunday. I figured, you know, not quite what I had in mind, traveling the same day as the race, but it was pretty good time later at night that I thought it would be fine, so I rebooked that flight. All right, so after that, I grabbed an Uber, took that to the hotel. I was staying in downtown Houston near where the race starts. It's also within walking distance to the convention center, so I think it was less than a 10-minute walk to the convention center. I walked over there immediately after I stopped at the hotel and dropped off my luggage. It was probably 5:45 at the time. The convention was supposed to be closing at 6, so I headed over there quickly to try to see if I could get my packet before they closed. By the time I got there, it was pretty much empty. So the convention center is really big. It feels kind of like a maze if you go through it. I ran this race last year. I kind of had the same experience where you almost just follow a crowd, see where to go. This year, without a lot of crowds, I was trying to remember where I had gone and just following some of the signs that they had. Ended up making it through all the escalators. You have to go up and around a little bit to actually get to the room that they have all of the bibs to hand out in. By the time I got there, there was no line at all. Pretty much just a straight walk through. They scan the bib, you walk over to the table that they tell you, and then they handed me the bib. Really no waiting whatsoever. So once I had that, I walked over to the expo side. So it's in a separate room. Walk over to the expo and you get your gear drop bag, as well as I think there was a towel, a Houston Marathon towel that they gave you at that time. And then most of the exhibits for the expo were pretty much closed by that point. So I walked through, kind of took the maze back through the expo and walked back towards the hotel. I had decided to meet Michael Brandt from Ketone IQ for dinner, so I walked over to his hotel, which was even closer to the expo, and we walked over and got pizza. It was a little bit of an adventure. There wasn't any seating there, so we ended up taking it to go, getting a ride back, and just ended up eating it in the lobby of his hotel, which was fun to talk to him. First time I had met him, so that was great to meet and talk about what he had going on. And then at that point, I walked back to my hotel. So again, it was just a few-minute walk back. It was the Cambria Hotel in downtown Houston. It is in an older building, which was it looked like it was fully renovated. It was in good shape. The only things to note that impacted me was there was scaffolding all around, which wasn't really a big deal. But with the construction that was going on, there was only 2 elevators working out of the 5 I think that they had, and it was a 21-story building. Overall, not a huge issue, but sometimes there was a pretty long wait for the elevator, so if you were in a hurry, sometimes it was a little bit of a challenge. And then I had a couple instances during the busier times when going down, it would stop at almost every single floor. Sometimes there weren't people there because they had already given up and walked away. And also, much of that time, once you got more than about halfway down, the elevator was already completely full and no one else could fit on anyway. So it It took a little bit of time to get down. Really wasn't that big of a deal. I was on the 16th floor, so I did opt for the elevator instead of walking. I think if I was a little bit lower, I probably would have walked more often. The hotel room was nice. I was by myself. Pretty big room, plenty of space, big bathroom. It also had a TV and a desk, which was kind of nice, came in handy. I think at that point I pretty much turned in for the night. So I have a shot here out the window. You can actually see where the street is to actually get into the corral. So the corral was only about a block away. And I think that was it for Friday night. Pretty much turned in at that point. In the morning on Saturday, the only thing I really had planned was the Kofuzi Run Club Shakeout, which was about a mile and a half or 2 miles away down by the bayou. So it was at a park, I guess, for the start. In the morning I got up, that wasn't until 10 o'clock, I believe, so I slept in a bit and then got up and kind of just hung out. I think at that point, since I already had my bib, I did my kit lay photo where I set everything on the ground to take a photo for Instagram to post later. The other thing that I did do, which was kind of handy, is Kofuzi had set up his shakeout run route on Strava. With Strava, it's very easy to simply set it as a favorite route and it pushes automatically over to Koros, and then you can load it onto the watch. So I have the Pace 3, loaded the run onto the watch, and then it gives full navigation with turn-by-turn directions. So I got that loaded up in the morning. The one thing to note in Houston, which I wasn't aware of, is that they don't allow electric scooter rentals. So there is no Lime scooters, which I typically would try to take a ride if I was going to go somewhere that was a little bit too far to walk. That wasn't available, so I ended up renting a bike. They do have a bike rental system in Houston, so I got a bike. It was one that supposedly was electric, but the electric assist didn't work, so I ended up just biking on over in Alpha Fly 3s, which was interesting. Not necessarily the best biking shoe, but I got there just fine. I think I had a double shot of espresso when I got there. I hung out with some of the folks as they were starting to gather. I was there about a half an hour early, so I got to talk to some people before Kofuzi even got there, and then I did talk to Mike a little bit before the run. He was going to run at the back of the pack to make sure that no one got lost. I think he has learned from experience that trying to make sure everyone stays on the route is a key to success in the shakeout runs. Since I had the route loaded on my watch, I volunteered to go out more near the front to make sure on the front end no one got lost there as well. So took the route that he had planned next to the bayou at the essentially the turnaround point where we went across over the bridge. We stopped and waited for everyone to gather and took us a group picture. So I took a group picture there, and then we went around back to the start point, hung out a little bit longer. Kind of as everyone went their separate ways, I went with Mike back towards the hotels. He was staying in downtown as well, so we kind of took a quick jog about a mile towards the direction where we were staying, and we ended up going to the grocery store to get some supplies. I got some water and fluids and other things to eat. Again, I was the guy wearing Alpha Fly 3s in the grocery store, but that's all I had, so that's what I ended up wearing. Went back to the hotel. Didn't have a lot planned for the rest of the day. For lunch, I had Halal, guys. I really like eating there when I'm out on the East Coast, and then I also found that they have them down in Houston when I was here last time for the Houston Marathon, so I went and ate there for lunch, just like I had for lunch last year before the Houston Marathon. And then at that point, I went back to the hotel, hung out the rest of the afternoon, took a few more photos. I think I took a photo of the fueling plan that I had, as well as I took a picture here of the bandages that I use. So they're hydrocolloid bandages that I put over my nipples to prevent chafing. I don't know that I've ever really made a post about them, but they have been something that I've found works well, stays on, easy to remove afterwards, haven't given me any problems. So those are something that I do use every single race. I put them on the night before, and then they are just ready to go in the morning. I did take one other photo out the window during the daytime. So this is, again, from my hotel room, 16th floor, looking downwards. The street on the right is right out the front door from the hotel. The first intersecting block was Corral B, and then one block farther down was Corral A, which was the corral I was starting from. So it was about a block and a half from the start. Super close, super convenient, made it so that it was really easy to get to the race. I did get a notification on Saturday that one of the sponsors had a jetpack that was going to be a demonstration down by the convention center, so I walked back down to see what there was to see down there. They did have an ice rink, which I thought was a little bit interesting in Houston. Walked around the convention center. Unfortunately, I was unable to find the jetpack demonstration. I'm not sure if I missed it or if it didn't happen. It was very windy that day, probably not ideal for a jetpack. Took a bunch of selfies around town at 0.5 zoom, so my arm looks really long. Kind of an interesting view. Then I went back to my hotel to have dinner at the restaurant and bar downstairs. I had assumed that they would have some type of pasta. They did not have any type of pasta, so I ended up getting a pizza off of the appetizer menu, as well as a chicken sandwich and fries. Not necessarily what I normally would eat before a race, but it ended up, not being a problem. It was fine. It was a pretty good sandwich and a good pizza. And then I went back to the hotel room for the rest of the night. I watched some YouTube on the TV. They had YouTube loaded on, so I watched a couple Kofuzi videos. I watched his video from Houston, as well as his video from Grandma's when I ran with him, and maybe one or two other ones. And then I went to bed. Okay, so race morning, I got up at about 4 a.m. I think actually it was about 4:15 or 4:20 that I got up. I started by having a Martin 320 with Element in it, and just started generally preparing for the race. Went to the bathroom a couple times like I normally do. I think it was close to 6 o'clock when I went downstairs, so I got all my gear on. One thing that I do like to wear before the race in the corrals is I bring a disposable like packable poncho. I buy them just like in a 5-pack off of Amazon, and that is typically my throwaway gear for before a race. I find that if I block the wind, it's usually warm enough. So it was close to 40 degrees in Houston on race morning, so pretty chilly, and it was pretty windy. It was a little bit cold standing in the start corrals, but it really wasn't too bad, especially since I wasn't out there too long. But that's my strategy for all races, is to use the poncho, and overall it's been a good option to have, and really easy to pack and carry with when traveling. But so race morning, I ended up going down to the lobby. I had set up a little bit of an informal pack that was a couple of guys that were also looking to run somewhere close to 6-minute miles. It was Michael Brandt from Ketone IQ that I had met the other night, as well as Chapin, who I have run with a couple times. I ran with him, or I met him in Houston last year, and then I ran with him in Boston. He knows the Believe in the Run crew, so I've seen him around, and he was also looking to run a similar pace. And then Bryce, one other guy that I had just talked to on Instagram, who actually is from Minnesota, where I'm from. Hadn't met him before, but he was also looking to run a similar pace. So I said, if you want to meet at the lobby of my hotel, we could all start out together and just see how it goes. So we all met there. We hung out in the hotel probably until 6:25, which the race starts at 7 o'clock. So it was a little bit more than half an hour before the race. We started to make our way out towards the start corrals. Only being a block and a half away, a super quick walk. Really no wait. This is a race that's a pretty big race, but also feels kind of like a small race. So it was really just Corral A, walked directly up to the front of the corral. And yeah, very easy, very convenient. Stayed in that corral until the start. They actually have a gate, so you're separated from the elite athletes, and then just before the race, a couple minutes before the race, they open that up. And all the corral pushes up or moves up towards the front or the start line, and then just about a minute before the start is when you would get up to there, and then once the race starts, you take off, so you're very close to the very start of the race. I think I was only a few seconds after, maybe 10 seconds after the race started. I made it through Past the start line. It was a little bit crowded at the beginning, maybe a little bit more crowded than I remember, but probably within a mile or less than a mile of a little bit of kind of weaving around and a little bit of dodging between people. It had opened up quite a bit. It is interesting because this race has a half marathon and a full marathon start at the same time. The first 7.5 or 8 miles are on the same course, so you are sharing the course with a significantly larger amount of people than who are running the marathon. Ends up making a lot bigger packs, or a lot more people running at a little bit faster paces from the half marathon, as opposed to if it was just a full marathon on a separate course. So it ended up being that we had quite a solid group going at the 6-minute mile range. We ended up running a bunch of the miles just under 6-minute miles. So it was pretty much in that 5:55 to 6-minute range for at least the first 7 miles for sure, until the half marathon split off. So there was a pretty big pack at that point. It split. Quite a few half marathoners went off. There was a handful of us that continued on the marathon route. I think at that point the pack that I was running with probably had about a half a dozen people or so from that at that point, and continued on still close to 6-minute miles. I think at some point just after that it turns and starts to head towards the west. This is going then into the wind, so it was a fairly windy day. It was coming out of the north, kind of the northwest direction, so when we turned going west, it was definitely noticeable that we were going into the wind. Very flat course throughout, but continued to hold that pace just under 6 minutes per mile, but it ended up starting to feel quite a bit harder. I was still working with the pack that I was in, just a handful of other runners up until mile 12. Mile 12, still going into the wind. There is pretty much the only, I call it major or bigger hill within the course. It's an overpass over the highway. And again, going into the wind, uphill, I decided to slow down a bit. I let the 4 or 5 other runners go ahead of me. They pulled away a little bit. I was looking to see maybe I could, catch back up on the downslope. Really just didn't feel super great at that point, so I ended up falling back from them a little bit right around that point. After coming over the bridge, there's a 180 degree turnaround, so you can kind of see who's behind you, what's going on, and then after that, almost immediately, there's a left turn, and that's the halfway point. So I crossed halfway, 118 and change, a little bit over 118.30, so pretty close to the 6-minute mile pace that I was targeting, but I was starting to slow down at that point. And then after that series of turns, it was pretty much straight back into the wind, and it was a much more exposed section. Definitely started feeling harder, so my paces dropped a little bit. I started running more in that 6:08 to 6:10 range, which would be on pace for about a 2:40 marathon instead of a 2:37. I was hoping that if I could at least maintain that pace, I'd run the first half at a 2:37 pace, and I would stay under 2:40 if I just maintained that the whole way. I actually felt somewhere in the middle there that it was feeling pretty hard. I considered slowing down even more. At that point, a woman named Erica and her sister came up behind me. They were running around a similar pace, around 6-minute miles. As they caught up to me, I made the decision I would just go with them and continue on at that pace. Tried to continue to hold around the 6 minutes per mile, or as close as I could. It definitely felt like a challenge going into the wind. Then around somewhere between mile 17 and mile 18, it turns about a 90-degree turn back to the right and ends up being almost direct tailwind at that point, which helped considerably. So it felt a lot easier. I felt like I was starting to relax, and the paces came a lot more easily. At that point, actually, if you look at the splits, they started to increase in speed, so I was getting a little bit faster each mile. I think I noticed when we got to mile 20 that we had run a 5:51. I thought, well, that seems too fast. I'm getting a little bit out ahead of myself. We're only at mile 20. There's still 10K to go. I better slow it down. So I did pull it back a little bit after that. Still ran another pretty good mile, but then kind of getting into the last few miles before the end of the race, getting back into downtown Houston, there are a couple a couple very slight hills. So this is after you go, there's a giant tunnel that you run through, you go through that. I think I was all feeling really good through that section. But then kind of as you get back towards town, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 really slight uphill sections, and then there's also 2 notable sections where you do an underpass and go under the highway, so you go down and then you come back up. It's not a lot of elevation gain on either one of them, but on the uphills it is noticeable. It felt like I was intentionally slowing down to try to keep the effort at the level that I thought was appropriate. But I think the hard part then is that once I got back up onto the flat, really hard to pick back up into the exact same pace that I was at before after slowing down slightly. So coming into the last 5K, I actually felt quite strong. I was still pushing hard. I was still had good turnover. I felt like I was still running hard and running to a strong effort and continuing to push the effort. As I looked down at my watch, I noticed that the paces were getting slower and slower. At some point within the last couple miles, more or less, I just stopped looking at the watch. Another thing to note with Houston is that as you get back into downtown, which is essentially like the last mile, maybe a little bit more than a mile, it does get a little bit tough for GPS, so some of the paces jump around quite a bit. So I ended up running mostly by feel that last mile or so. The splits show definitely slowed down, but as I got into that finishing stretch, kind of like the last 0.2, 0.3, once I could see the 26 mile marker showing up, and then you kind of come up on the finish, it comes around the corner. Into that last stretch, I had a good kick into the finish. Didn't quite get it down back below the 2:37, ended up with a 2:38.56. So that was a couple minutes off of my personal best, but I still felt like it was a strong effort, and it felt pretty solid the entire time. Do note, ran with the Alpha Fly 3s, really been loving this shoe. This pair that I ran in for Houston actually crossed 500 miles at some point during the race. I had been tracking my mileage on Strava. I think they ended up at 509 miles at the end of the race. So super impressed that they still felt as good as they did at 500 miles. Definitely some outsole wear and a bit of compression on the foam, but overall still in great shape, still holding up, and still felt great over the full 26 miles for Houston. Okay, so then after the race, with the change in flight plans, I ended up canceling my last night in the hotel, so I only had until 11 o'clock to check out. So I went through, you walk through the convention center after the race. I walked back to the hotel. I think it was close to 10 o'clock by then, so I showered. I packed up my suitcase, and then it was, pretty much 11 o'clock by that point when I went down and checked out. At that point, I just hung out in the lobby. So the lobby of the hotel had a fireplace, it had couches. I just sat there and hung out for a while. I did set up plans to meet Kofuzi after the race, so he had run the half. He went back out on the course to spectate, and then he also was checking out on Sunday and then flying home on Sunday. So he, after spectating, went back, checked out, and then he came over to my hotel and meet me, so I just waited in the lobby until he came and met me. We hung out. We actually stopped at 2 different places. I had pasta at the first place, and then the second one I wasn't super hungry, but I hadn't had any tacos, and I was in Texas, so I decided to order some tacos. I ended up eating those. They were really good as well. And then we shared an Uber to the airport. His flight was a little earlier, mine was a little bit later, but we just decided to share to make things easier. At the time, I didn't have a seat booked for the hotel, a seat assigned for the plane, so I went to see the agent at the gate as soon as I got there. I guess fortunate that they assigned me a premium economy seat, so it was the row just behind first class. There was a lot more legroom in that seat, but otherwise it was pretty much just a regular economy seat. After getting that assigned, I went and had ramen at the airport, one of the restaurants at the airport. So trying to stay fueled up as much as possible and get into a recovery mode after the race and try to get as many nutrients as I could. So then my flight was scheduled to leave at 8. Unfortunately, at that point, I started getting texts that there were delays on the flight coming in, or the flight crew coming in from a different city due to the weather. I think the first one said it was delayed until 10:15. Then I got another text that said it was delayed until 10:50. And then I actually got another text that said they found a different flight crew, and it was then brought up to 9:55. I think they ended up having us board just before 10 o'clock, and it was probably about 10:30 by the time we actually took off. Okay, so got on the plane close to 10 o'clock. I think we took off around 10:30 once the crew had arrived. I had been at the airport for around 5 hours in total, which was pretty long time, super boring, but ended up being okay. Did get back in to Minneapolis around 1 a.m. And after taking the Uber back home, it was about 2 a.m. So that was definitely a very, very long day, very tired, but I had tons of fun over the weekend running the Houston Marathon. Super happy with the time, and always enjoy being able to hang out with other runners, including Kofuzi and everybody else that we got to hang out with at his shakeout run, as well as all of the folks that I got to run with and talk to just throughout the weekend and through the race. Houston is a really fun race. It's flat. It's a good course from a ability to PR standpoint if the weather's good, which it was really good this year, and it's a good size that it balances having enough people to run with no matter what your pace is, but also has really good logistics, and it is very easy being a looped course. If you stay at a hotel that is close to downtown, you will easily be within walking distance from both the start and the finish, which makes things a lot easier from a logistics standpoint. No riding buses and no extra time waiting and doing that amount of transportation. Okay, so I think that is it for my Houston Marathon race weekend recap. Thank you for watching.